Hello, friends. The host Eric here, host talking with famous people. I want to talk today about extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, Immanuel Kant, utilitarianism, and the deontological split. So, prior to Kant, nobody had really parsed out that morality conflicts are all centered around a subjective-objective conflict. Namely, the subjectivists, who are viewing what they do in terms of concrete goals and how to get there, are using TE and FI, whereas the universalists, or the deliberators, are using TI and FE as objective metrics. So when people battle over moral questions, they usually refuse to address first the only question that matters, which is, are we going to treat morality as objective or subjective? So instead, what people do is they cross frameworks all the time. They argue sometimes on util, sometimes on deontology, sometimes on, I don't know. But what's to note here is that Immanuel Kant, what he actually did when he created his work, whatever it was called, something about morals or something. I don't remember. Anyway, whatever it's called. When he created that book and he came up with categorical imperatives, he said, to do morality properly, we must eliminate all TE concerns. The categorical imperative states that it is only morally permissible to treat other agents as ends in themselves. You cannot treat them as means to an end. Now, the difference between TE and TI fundamentally is one of how versus why. So TE says, here's a goal. We determine it probably through FI. What's important to me or my in-group? Or this circumstance, this community, or this particular problem. It's goal-focused. It begins with knowing what you want to do, what you want to accomplish in the physical world. Then the TE part of it is figuring out efficient ways to get there, smart ways to get there, or bad ways to get there. And there's a certain amount of trial and error in that for me as I'm getting more and more accustomed to using TE in this new life context. But what Immanuel Kant said is we can't ever use TE as a moral adjudicator because it necessarily dips us back into the subjective realm. It says, what's our goal first and foremost? Well, our goal has to be the moral equivalency of the other. And it's sort of axiomatically necessary if you're going to take a principlist approach to ethics or try to evaluate ethics through an objective metric. And so Kant did a whole bunch of rigmarole basically to say, it's better we just use TI for morals. Now, frankly, I tend to agree with him. Certainly, it makes sense to use TI for morals because TI says the line between secular public policy and individual understandings of ethics needs to be a clear, bright line. It needs to not be crossed. And to me, that makes the most sense because it restrains individuals from transgressing upon other individuals. So, for example, a TE solution to people speeding is, you got a couple of different ones. One might be put speed bumps down so people who speed wreck their car. That's a TI respecting TE solution. A not TI respecting TE solution is to set up speed limits and cops and fines and shit like that, because then you're creating harms to prevent harm that has not ever been accomplished, that has not ever actually been realized. So I'm speeding means I'm more likely to crash. Unless I do crash, I haven't actually created any harm. Now, the cop pulls me over, gives me a $100 ticket. That creates $100 worth of harm right there, assuming I follow through and pay it on time and all that shit. It also creates the metaphysical weight of knowing I've got to follow through on that task and pay the shit, which is in itself worth $100 at least. And then if I don't pay it, well, then all of a sudden I get my car impounded and all this other shit happens, and before you know it, it's made a substantial, significant impact on my life that I chose to drive fast on that occasion, even though I harmed nobody. A massive amount of harm has been done to me. Now, when people try to evaluate the utilitarian outcomes of a policy like that, they go, well, it's moral because it saves lives on the road. But the thing is, even if the statistics they're comparing actually are indicative of what they say they are, in other words, it's not just a post hoc fallacy where they go, see, we changed the laws and then traffic accidents go down, and so therefore we're right. That's just a post hoc sort of fallacy where it says because something happened after something else, it happened because of it. There's no necessarily reason to conclude that. And the causal links that people try to establish are often very difficult to establish meaningfully. But the other thing to note, though, is they don't count the harms of enforcement in their equation. It's like saying, well, let's have a business where we only count the incoming money and the money we spend on employees, but we don't count any other kind of overhead. Then we'll be really profitable. Well, then you'll be pretend profitable. That's different than really profitable, right? Because you're just not counting some of the outgoing money. Well, that's the same thing with utilitarianism on a moral level. You're just not counting some of the utilitarian harms because they're either unanticipated, undesired, unintended, certainly, or they are just not something that is part of the relevant scope of data, it seems. Of course, it's relevant to the people who are experiencing the harms. So the thing is, that's why utilitarianism, according to me and according to Kant, is a failure as a moral system. But I think more pressingly why it's a failure as a moral system is that it requires us to predict outcomes and assumes that we're better than random at doing so. Of course, we're dealing with complex, chaotic systems of human individuals who are not just acting in response to the system, but upon the system, and for who come up with creative ways around shit, you know? All of these creative ways around shit, these little sort of hacks we do to get around government, they are a drag on human existence. So that's why we should only justify intrusions by government when, in fact, there is somebody to achieve justice for. If you are a law enforcement professional, or if you are a county attorney, if you are a pig with a fancy hat, if you are a goose with a shiny button, if you are whatever you are, and you have the ability to use force or threat of force to compel another individual human being against their will to take action or not take action, if you detain them, if you arrest them, if you handcuff them, if you coerce them, you are transgressing upon them. Unless it's responsive use of force. Now, in order to make sure you're not the criminal transgressing upon somebody else, step one is find out for whom are you achieving justice? Who's the person that the crime has been committed against, so that you know that there's a equilibrium imbalance here that needs to be remedied, that needs to be rectified. That's why we have law enforcement, that's why we have laws. When one individual citizen transgresses upon another, then that person creates an equilibrium imbalance of justice. And TI tells us that a natural rights framework, a negative rights framework, allows for responsive use of force when an individual has been transgressed upon. Of course, if no individual has been transgressed upon, if nobody is saying, I need the law and law enforcement to attain justice for me, then the law enforcement personnel, the individual representing the law, is not actually enforcing a crime. Because remember, to be a crime, the remedy for the crime needs to attain justice for somebody. If there's not an injustice committed, then there can't be a rectifying justice. It's simple, basic logic. So for the individuals who choose to ignore these ethical constraints, these ethical requirements, to be a good person, you have to not choose violence and force against your fellows who have not themselves transgressed upon another. If you initiate the violence or force against that person who has not transgressed, then you are a transgressor, a criminal. That's a real crime because you're harming another person through force or threat of force without adequate justification of responsive force. So now, people might disagree with this ethical framework, and they might say, no, we can't live by that ethics. Okay, fair enough. I'm not trying to say that everybody has to live by this ethics or be evil. What I am saying is that you are a law enforcement professional, and you're not considering for whom you get justice, or the amount of harm you do, and to whom you do the harm. Remember, often, when crimes are prosecuted, innocents are done great harm. People who are not involved in the crime at all are done immense harm. Now, that may be necessary when the crime is something like rape or murder because, of course, the rectification of that crime attains justice for somebody. Remember, this is the criminal justice system. It's not the Kafkaesque, let's apply law in torturous ways in order to malevolently, malignantly attack other individual citizens for no reason other than our own spite and personal vendetta. That's not how it's supposed to work. At all. And people who attempt to make it work like that, the Kansas Bar Association is a little bit behind in their house cleaning. There is a renegade loose in Pratt County, and she's running roughshod over the Constitution, the rights of fellow citizens, and her duties as a public servant. This woman is a menace. So, thanks for watching Talking with Famous People. That's about Kant and deontology and all that other stuff. And, of course, somebody who runs afoul of both of those ethical systems and any other one you can possibly come up with, of course, being Tracy Beverland. Thanks, Tracy. You're a real piece of fucking work.